Trapped in a strange and hostile environment, relentlessly hunted by an indestructible force, you're filled with nothing but a sense of dread.
So a while back I did a challenge review of Hollow Knight, and while it wasn't exactly the greatest video, the whole challenge was that I play the game on a difficulty that I modded in based off of difficulty in the Devil May Cry games called Heaven and Hell, where both the player and enemies die in a single hit. And in Devil May Cry that difficulty is more of a joke, kinda, since you have guns and can kill everything easily. But you didn't have that in Hollow Knight, so I thought that could be a fun idea. It ended up being deceptively challenging, actually, but it was still pretty fun.
I filmed that review months ago, but only got around to releasing it around the time that they added Dread mode to Metroid, so I took that as a bit of a personal challenge. You see, in Metroid Dread, the new Dread mode makes it so that you die in just a single hit. All the enemies still have their normal health though, so this really is a test of the ultimate skill. So of course I was going to beat Dread mode, and not only that, but I was going to do it 100%. My Hollow Knight playthrough took me about 15 hours and 11 minutes. And I died 337 times. Yes, I was keeping count. That was all while also being able to kill my enemies just as instantly as they killed me. So will Dread mode be harder, or will having the galaxy's sweetest arm cannon make this a breeze? Let's find out. Metroid games do have stories and interconnected plots, but honestly they're not super important. At least not to Dread. Dread is the fifth in the line of 2D Metroids starting from the original, and there's a brief cutscene at the start that recaps the important events from previous entries. In the first game, Samus travels to Zebes in order to stop space pirates led by Mother Brain from using Metroids to conquer the galaxy. Then by Metroid 2, the Galactic Federation deems the Metroids to be too dangerous of a threat, so Samus is sent to SR-388 to exterminate every last Metroid. She leaves only a baby Metroid alive, which she delivers to a research station, and then Super Metroid kicks off with the baby Metroid being kidnapped from the research station by Ridley. Samus pursues them back to Zebes, where by the end she finishes off Mother Brain for good with the help of the baby Metroid, which unfortunately dies in the climax. Samus then blows up Zebes and gets the heck out of Dodge. After all that, we have Metroid Fusion, where Samus travels back to SR-388 and is attacked by an X-Parasite. Apparently the X-Parasites have been in hiding for years, since the Metroids were their only natural predator, and now that they're extinct, the X's begin to rapidly expand. After being attacked by one of the X-Parasites, Samus is saved by a vaccine created from Metroid DNA, and is now uniquely able to fight against the X. By the end of the game, she crashes an X-infected research station into SR-388, blowing up the planet and killing all the X-Parasites. She really loves blowing things up, you know? Actually, if she had just blown up the planet from the start, it would have saved her a lot of trouble. There's a lesson to be learned there. By the time Metroid Dread takes place, Samus receives video evidence that the X-Parasites have somehow survived and are on a planet named ZDR. Samus is probably the only person alive that can fight against the X-Parasites, since the Metroid vaccines are in short supply these days. Whoops. So she sets off towards ZDR in order to investigate. I just recapped 4 games and set up Dread's plot for you in just a few minutes. Dread itself isn't plot heavy either. There's maybe like 4 full-on story cutscenes with dialogue in the game, not including the scenes where you talk to the AI. The end has some slightly odd plot twists, but story and character development aren't a major focus here. That being said, I gotta say, I absolutely love how Samus is portrayed in this game. She comes off as a complete badass, all without ever seeing her face much or hearing her speak. She does speak a little, but not much. Instead, you get to see her as a super cool, awesome space bounty hunter that has dealt with crisis upon crisis. I just can't get over the Kraid cutscenes where Samus just casually charges a beam and blasts him in the face, and then at the end she dodges a spike with no effort, like this was every fucking Tuesday to her. The game only leaves you wanting to see more of this. Metroid Dread is the smoothest that Samus has ever controlled. You can run, jump, slide, and shoot better than ever before. Wall jumps are much easier to pull off, you can aim in all directions, the parry mechanic from Samus Returns is here, giving you a new weakness to exploit on enemies, and of course, like any good Metroid, as you progress through the game, you unlock new abilities that further enhance movement and combat capabilities. The grapple tether lets you latch onto certain surfaces in order to swing off things or reach higher ledges, and can also be used to exploit certain enemy weaknesses. Then there's the speed booster, which allows you to reach high speeds, making you invincible and able to break through certain blocks. If you master the speed booster, you'll be bouncing off walls and flying all over the place. You might even be able to use it as an attack. You're encouraged to use these new abilities to explore areas that you previously weren't able to before. It feels wrong to label a Metroid game as a Metroidvania, but that's where we are, I guess. Exploration is a big part of Dread, and you'll probably find yourself lost more than a few times throughout the course of the adventure. The level design can feel downright maze-like at times. Usually, if you just unlocked a new ability, you can check the map to see places where you might be able to use that new ability to reach. Other times, you'll stare at the map and say, okay, that's a dead end, and there's a dead end, and oh, I can go here. Oh, but that just leads to another dead end. And you'll have no clue where the hell you're supposed to go next. Thankfully, there's a mission log you can look at to see the previous events that have happened. You can even read important dialogue again, in case you might have missed something. Other than that, there's always the tried and true method of blasting and bombing every wall, floor, and ceiling in sight to see if they're hiding any secrets, which is pretty par for the course by Metroid terms. Take the first time you enter Kataris. There's a door to your right, but it only leads to dead ends. You're supposed to shoot this wall to the left in order to progress. And this did have me stumped at one point. And this was like my second or third playthrough. They added rookie mode post-launch for people struggling with the game, but most of my struggles with each playthrough have actually been with forgetting where I'm supposed to go next. And I don't think rookie mode does anything to address that, unfortunately. For the curious wanderers who like to venture off the beaten path, you might discover power-ups which increase missile capacity or max health. In some cases, you might even sequence break the game. A sequence break is when you enter an area, or obtain an ability, earlier than what may be intended. Some of these are actually accounted for by the developers. For example, if you obtain bombs before the fight with Kraid, there's a specific weakness of his that you can exploit with them. Other sequence breaks definitely aren't fully accounted for, but make for very entertaining speedruns. Then of course, we have to talk about combat. You can stand in place and manual aim in all directions to shoot enemies that are flying or clinging to walls waiting to ambush you. Each enemy has its own weakness. Some have an attack that you can parry, others can only be damaged with missiles or charge shots. Playing on Dread mode really made me take a step back with each enemy and study them before engaging. Otherwise, you die almost immediately. Some have attacks I just didn't want to deal with, while others were on the safe side of things if I could land a parry. Later in the game, you encounter the X-Parasites, and they take over pretty much all normal enemies from that point on. Some of those enemies become stronger versions of themselves, while others remain largely unchanged, save for one new gimmick. When you defeat an X, the parasite returns to its true form and flies away. You can absorb it like any ammo or health pickup to restore those attributes, but if you leave it alone, the parasite may begin to reconstitute itself and form again, just like in Metroid Fusion. So even if you don't need the pickup, you may find yourself opting to absorb the X just so that they don't spawn back. The real highlight of combat are of course the boss fights, which put all your skills to the test. I want to talk more about my experiences with these in the challenge section of the review, but for now just know that each boss has attacks that can be studied, predicted, and avoided. No matter how impossible that may seem at times, there's always a way to avoid taking a hit. Take time to study their patterns, learn how to exploit their weaknesses, and the fight is already over. Let's just take a quick look at the first boss for a second. Corpius. Corpius has a few phases. In phase 1, it only has a few attacks. If it shakes its tail, then it's going to low sweep, so just jump over it. If you see its head move and jaw bulge a little, then it's going to spit poison, so just dodge to the left or right. You can also just shoot the poison ball and you might get some ammo out of it. If it brings the tail back, then it's going to poke at you, and if you position yourself just right, Corpius leaves itself open to a face full of missiles. The head is its only weak spot for phase 1, so you always have to aim for that. I won't spoil the rest of the fight, but as you can see, so long as you understand the attacks, there's always a way to beat a boss without taking damage. The challenge, of course, is getting to that point in the first place. But nothing is stopping you from exploring and grabbing a few extra missile capacity upgrades or energy upgrades if you need them. Unfortunately, there are a few lazy boss fights that just get repeated throughout the game, getting slightly more difficult each time. And honestly, it's kinda lame. I would've liked more unique bosses instead of 5 big mother brain ripoffs, but overall, I enjoyed all the boss fights in this game, except this one. This one fucking sucked. And also the final boss. But we'll get to that. Finally, we have the Emmys, which are these robotic sentries that hunt you down in specific areas. You can't fight them at first, so the only option is to run. These sections are filled with such intensity and suspense that they're obviously a big highlight of the experience. If they catch you, you have only 2 opportunities to parry an attack and escape before it's game over. You can try to stealth around and avoid them, but they can hear you. So sometimes, it's just better to make a mad dash for it. It feels super satisfying when you're actually able to take one of these things down, since you often get a new ability, making you feel much stronger than before. To do that, you gotta locate and fight the Mother Brain ripoff first. So anytime before that, you are completely defenseless against the enemies and their relentless pursuit of you. You can run, you can hide, but you just can't fight. Thankfully, the game leaves an auto checkpoint every time you enter one of these areas, so dying isn't the worst thing in the world. Overall, Metroid Dread is a challenging but fair 2D action platformer that gives the player freedom to explore and room to grow. The soundtrack for Metroid games have always been low-key bangers. It's criminal how underappreciated some of this music is. They help set the mood perfectly. Whether the game is setting up some suspenseful horror or a grand epic tale, each song hits the nail dead on the head. Of course, everything has a sci-fi aesthetic to fit in with the overall theme of Metroid. But other than the music, the sound design in general is also something that needs to be appreciated. Specifically, I want to talk about the Emmys and those terrifying beeps they make as they search for you. Those damn beeps still haunt my mind. Everything about the Emmys leaves a very strong impression, from those haunting beeps to their oddly strange and incredibly robotic movement. I mean, even those Boston Dynamics robots have way more human traits than these horrific monstrosities. On the topic of visuals, each area has its own unique theme, from lava cavern to secret facility. It's still easy to get lost, but at least you can tell which area you're in simply by looking around. Most of the time. The background elements are also nicely detailed, and you just might be able to spot an upcoming ambush by paying attention to things going on around you. One thing I really like is how the green glowing parts on Samus's armor really pop when you're in a dark area, which isn't too often, admittedly, but it does really shine. Character animation for cutscenes can be a bit basic at times, but like I said, I love how awesome Samus is in some of these. Although, every character except for like Adam, the AI, speaks some weird alien language, probably Chozo, which I love, don't get me wrong. I feel like it adds a different sense of immersion to the experience, but makes it a little harder to judge the vocal performance, I guess. Well, I mean, that on top of the fact that nobody really talks much in the first place. Still, I feel like that silence says a lot about Samus as a character. It's not that she can't speak, she just chooses not to most of the time. And that is intimidating.
Here comes a new challenger!
To unlock Dread mode, you have to beat the game on hard mode first, so I bumped out a quick playthrough before starting Dread mode. It was good practice anyways. The gimmick with Dread is that you die in just a single hit. Every attack in the game will kill you instantly. But notice how I use the word attack. That's because rooms with extreme temperatures and abusing the Phantom Cloak, while they both do damage, won't kill you immediately on this difficulty. Everything else is pretty much just death if you're not careful. I didn't get footage of this because I only noticed it afterwards, but once you have the gravity suit, you're immune to lava damage. Flamethrower hazards also don't seem to do any damage to you with the suit on. But if that flame comes from an enemy, it will still do damage to you for whatever stupid reason. Because of this, you have to watch where you're going and try to deal with enemies from a safe distance. The cloak can actually help you avoid or get closer to certain enemies if you need to. Even if it starts to drain on your health, it's not like you're using it for much else anyways. In general, I found myself trying to use abilities I didn't get much use out of in my other playthroughs. Barely used cloak normally, but it was a lifesaver for Dread mode. Speed booster too, since it gives you some invincibility when running through areas. Ice missiles can freeze enemies, rendering them harmless for a bit. And then of course, many enemies have attacks that can be parried. It's pretty much essential you learn the timing for this to deal with some tougher enemies, as it basically acts as a finishing move on them and gives you some extra ammo pickups. I was actually thinking about doing some sequence-breaking speedrun tricks to get things like the space jump and screw attack early, since those pretty much make you an invincible death ball to most enemies. But since I was going for 100% anyways, I figured that didn't really matter as much. The start of the game on Dread mode is stressful, but pretty easy so long as you take your time and don't rush. Unless you already have the path and enemy spawn locations memorized, rushing will have you lightly grazing an enemy that was just off screen a second ago, and that's death, baby. Since this was also a 100% run, I had to make sure I grabbed as many pickups as possible. Energy was only useful for abusing Phantom Cloak, or navigating extreme temperature rooms without the right suit, and then of course missiles and super bombs increased my capacity with those types of ammo. You get super bombs so late into the game that they didn't matter much to me. I decided not to go for 100% till after I obtained every main upgrade in the game, since some of those optional power-ups require the use of certain upgrades like screw attack and speed boost. So up until the very end, I was playing the game pretty normally. And while there were some regular enemies here and there that liked to give me some trouble, the real highlight was the bosses. By the time you get to Dread mode, you need to have most of their attacks and weak points memorized, or else you're just gonna die. Like, a lot. There were a few bosses that I knew were going to give me some trouble, like SQ, specifically with this stupid storm missile attack it has, experiment number Z57, and its Flappy Bird attack. Golzuna has an awkward to dodge blast attack too, and don't even get me started on my twin robot Chozo soldiers. As it turns out, SQ was indeed an annoying fight, taking me 11 tries across a 12-minute span. It doesn't have many attacks, but the ones it does have are super annoying to dodge. Embarrassingly enough, I even died during the easy part of the fight. Of course, I couldn't be held back forever. I had bigger fish to fry. Mr. Flappy Bird actually wasn't that bad. It took 4 tries in about 8 minutes, which includes cutscene time, by the way. I find this guy really fun to fight for some reason. I don't know what it is. I think I kind of just like dodging his attacks. He's got really fun patterns. Golzuna, first try. Second try. 2 minutes though. You just need to get good at using the space jump for this fight. Now the robot Chozo soldiers, or the twin robot Chozo soldiers, is one of those boss fights that's just repeated throughout the game. Their idea to make this one more difficult is to just add a second one and give it more health. I hate these bosses. They killed me again, and again, and again, and again, and again, about 21 damn times. This was just the first duo, too. You see how one of them is gold and the other one isn't? The gold one is stronger, and the other one already takes about 25 missiles to take down. Yes, I counted. Later in the game, you encounter 2 gold ones, and you know what? I'm an idiot. Storm Missile makes these bosses nothing. It takes them out super fast. I wasted my time like an idiot for no reason. It only took me like, I had 21 tries in the first duo, another 9 for the gold duo. It's about like 30 tries to realize that Storm Missile was the best thing ever invented, even though it really eats through your ammo. But it made the fight so much more bearable. Before challenging the final boss, I did a sweep of the whole map to get 100%. Some of these capacity upgrades require a bit of quick thinking to acquire. The trickiest ones always involve the speed booster, since the game never really gives you a good tutorial on how you're supposed to use this thing, or how to shine spark for that matter. I've played through tons of Metroid games, and I still can't really get the hang of speed boost that well. The pulse radar is a must-have, since it lets you see hidden blocks, and the map will shine in areas where there's an upgrade you haven't found. Unless you've seen the upgrade, then it just puts it on the map with its own marker. This makes tracking down every last upgrade and getting to 100% much more bearable, since there's always an easy way to keep tabs on what you've already done and what you should do next. The main problem is losing your progress when you die. When you progress through the story normally, the game has a lot of auto checkpoints before bosses and enemy zones, but after you've cleared through all that, there are no more auto checkpoints, except for like traveling between zones. If you die, you go back to the last save. I can't tell you how many times a stupid little bat or something would kill me and I would have to recollect everything all over again. Super frustrating, would not recommend. Do your 100% on a different playthrough. It doesn't help that all the energy increases feel completely useless on Dread mode either. And now I almost forgot to talk about the Emmys. The Emmys on Dread mode are actually some of the safest enemies to encounter, only because the game checkpoints before going into an enemy zone, and they don't do damage on contact. Instead, they give you 2 chances to parry their attack before you can get away from them. In a normal playthrough, this is insta-death, and it's no different on Dread, but everything is insta-death over here, so it doesn't really make a difference. All except for the Ice Emmy, who becomes an incredibly deadly threat on Dread mode. It's because the Ice Beam it has will kill you instantly on sight. It actually makes this thing incredibly terrifying, but it honestly wasn't that bad to get past. After collecting every upgrade, it was finally time to fight the final boss, Ravenbeak. I don't even know where to start with this guy. The first pair of robot Chozo soldiers took me like 15 minutes because I wasn't using Storm Missile. That was the longest any boss had taken me up until Ravenbeak. You want to take a guess at how long Ravenbeak took me? How many times I died? Because honestly, I stopped keeping track. It was a lot. I was playing for what felt like hours. Hey, let me break it down for you. A Ravenbeak has 3 big phases. Actually, if you don't want to be spoiled for the final boss, then just head over to the next section. But if you're still here, let's talk about this guy. Phase 1, he puts up a shield that you gotta blast away. He has this attack where he shoots into the sky, forcing you to get close. Then he takes a swipe at you. He'll also shoot a dark matter ball at you, and if you don't take it out immediately, then it becomes a big problem. Sometimes he wants to charge you, and you can parry this to do damage. After enough damage, he does a big red swipe attack. You see this at the beginning of the game, actually. Duck under, parry, and now his shield becomes invincible, so the only way to do damage is from those parries. Other than that, most of his attacks remain the exact same. And I kept dying to this stupid claw swipe attack because I'm an idiot, and I kept thinking it was a different attack. I don't know why. I'm just dumb. Other than that, it's a pretty easy phase. So then we move on to phase 2. And apparently, the Chozo have wings. Which, I mean, they are bird people, I guess? I had no idea. Anyways, the shield is gone and he flies now.
They fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
He'll try to stomp you or charge at you. You can usually just move to the side or slide under him in these situations. He'll also charge a big beam, but if you move under him, you'll have plenty of time to get some shots off. Then he has this machine gun volley attack, which looks super intimidating, but once you understand you just need to circle around him, it's not that bad. But phase 3. Phase 3 legit felt like it came down to RNG with which attacks he used on you. The problem is this big stupid sun he chucks into the sky. It occasionally shoots waves of projectiles that you have to dodge, while also dodging Ravenbeak himself and trying to get attacks in. If he's charging his big laser, you have to keep track of when the cannon flashes to know when it's about to fire. All while dodging sun rays at the risk of getting skin cancer. But it's too late! This fight already gave me cancer. I really didn't think it would be this bad. I thought the Flappy Bird boss would give me more trouble, but that was ridiculously easy compared to this. I'm sure this fight took at least 2 hours, alright? People have beaten the game in less than 2 hours. No other boss in the whole game took me longer than 16 minutes in Dread mode. But man, I felt so goddamn vindicated when I won. See you next fucking mission. Okay, the nightmare is over. The game gives us some stats to look at in the end, so let's take a look over there. We have a cleared time of 5 hours and 47 minutes. I was at about the 3.5 hour mark when I had all the main upgrades and decided to backtrack for 100%, so that plus the final boss apparently took about 2 hours. Except you see that the total playtime was 11 hours. The game doesn't actually count the time spent in the map screen, and I'm not sure how it counts dying and restarting from a checkpoint, but that's about an extra 5.5 hours of all that right there that doesn't get added to my clear time. It just gets taken away from my sanity. 100% of all items collected, including 1,299 energy, 275 missiles, and 15 power bombs. I died 224 times, probably half of those from Ravenbeak alone. If I compare this to when I did my challenge review of Hollow Knight, I died 113 less times in Metroid, and spent about 4 hours less in total playtime. All while going for 100%, which I didn't do for Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is just a completely different nightmare though. I mean, that whole game is just one big Ravenbeak. Total damage received was 173,679, which I'm not sure how they calculate damage in this mode since I always died in one hit. If I have 99 energy, am I always taking 99 damage? So if I have more health, will I take more damage? I don't really know. 30 bosses defeated and 89 times saved. Overall, not too shabby for my first 100% run. Finally, let's pop this into the leaderboard. The 2D Metroids have helped define a well-beloved genre of games, and Dread is at the pinnacle of those Metroids in my opinion. It's well deserving of a second place position, making it an excellent game. Samus controls buttery smooth, letting you pull off insane acrobatics and dodge enemy attacks. Each power-up makes you feel significantly more powerful, being able to shoot through walls and destroy everything in a flash. All of that makes Dread have a real good feeling of progression. Boss fights and the enemies are a big highlight of the experience, with bosses having many intricate attack patterns to study in order to overcome, and enemies requiring quick thinking and fast reflexes to avoid. It's very easy to get lost in this big sprawling map, even for me after 3 whole playthroughs, and I'm sure many players would have liked some extra guidance on the easier difficulties. Despite that, it's still a really short game that's over just when everything starts to get really good. There isn't much story, but I love how badass Samus is in nearly every scene. Metroid Dread is definitely worth your time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. Metroid Dread is an amazing game. The only real downside it has is the same downside that all the other 2D Metroids have, which is their incredibly short length. But it's not the size that matters, or so I'm told. It's how you use it. And there's a lot of replay value here. Plus, if Dread leaves you wanting more, you have no excuse not to check out Super Metroid. As long as you have a Nintendo Switch Online membership, you should have access to this game. And any Dread fans are gonna love this one too. Although you are even more likely to get lost in that game. Anyways, as usual, I appreciate you and everything you do. Ciao.